Chapter 3, Federalism. Government in the United States consists of one national government, 50 state governments, and many local governments to create a grand total of more than 89,000. There are basically three ways of organizing governmental structures. A unitary system places ultimate governmental authority in the national government. A confederate system is a league of independent states, and a federal system divides government authority between a national government and state governments. Let's look at a chart. Alright, on the left we have a unitary system of government. This system of government has a central government that gives the power to the subnational governments, or counties or provinces. This is the most common form of government. Local government typically have only those powers granted to them by the central government, rather than any reserve power. In the middle, we have a confederal form of government. In this confederal system of government, power is retained by the local or regional government. The European Union is an example of this system. Each country has ultimate power within the system, although there is an EU Parliament and other institutions that set a common European policy. And on the right, we have the federal system. The federal system divides power between the national and lower level governments. Each government has a distinct power that the other governments cannot override. A number of countries use the federal system: Australia, Brazil, Canada, and yours truly, the United States. The United States developed a federal system because it was a practical solution which retained state traditions and local power, while creating a national government strong enough to avoid the problems associated with the Articles of Confederation. Federalism also solved the problem of the geographic size and regional isolation. Other arguments for federalism included that it diffuses political dissatisfaction among the different governments. It provides a training ground for future national leaders. It allows diverse groups to develop in their own regions, and it brings government closer to the people. Certainly, not every political viewpoint supports federalism. Some of the arguments against federalism are that it provides a way for powerful state and local interests to block national progress. It allows for the possibility for the expansion of national powers at the expense of the state, and it establishes a way for powerful state and local interests to deny equal rights for minorities. The constitutional basis for American federalism. Powers of the national government. Powers delegated to the national government include both expressed and implied powers. Most of the expressed powers are bestowed on Congress through Article 1, Section 8. So expressed powers or enumerated powers, they mean the same thing, just different name, are powers found in the Constitution. Implied powers allow the national government to make decisions that fall outside of those expressed powers. Another name for implied powers would be the Necessary and Proper Clause, also called the Elastic Clause. The reason why we call it this is because it allows the United States government to stretch their powers. We also have inherent powers. The other major source of power is known as inherent powers. These are powers that are recognized by all sovereign nations. And I'll give you an example. Just because you're government, you get to acquire new land. Just because you're government, you get to deal with other sovereign nations. We have one other key concept up here on the PowerPoint, and that is police power. The authority to legislate for the protection of the health, morals, safety, and welfare of the people. In the United States, most police power is reserved to the states. Concurrent powers. These are the powers that are shared by both the national and state government. An example of this would be the power to tax or to make and enforce laws, such as establishing courts. We have prohibited powers. These powers apply to both the national and state governments. The national government is prohibited from taxing exports. State governments are prohibited from conducting foreign policy and from coining money. The Supremacy Clause, Article 6 of the Constitution mandates that actions by the national government are supreme. Any conflicts between a legitimate action of the national government and a state will be resolved in favor of the national government. States cannot use their reserved or concurrent powers to override national policies. We have vertical checks and balances which allow states to influence the national government and vice versa. Horizontal checks and balances provide another form of check and balance in that the governments on the same level, either state or national, may check one another. Interstate relations. Article 4 of the Constitution attempts to resolve potential problems between states by stipulating the following. The first one is the full faith and credit clause. States must honor actions of other states. It protects the rights of citizens as they move from one state to another, and it has contributed to the unity of American citizens. Privileges and immunities. Citizens of one state must not be treated as aliens when in another state. If the citizen of one state moves to another state, the receiving state must treat the new person as a citizen. Interstate extradition. If a person is alleged to have committed a crime in one state and then flees to another state, the accused person will be extradited to the state where the alleged actions occurred. States may also enter into interstate compacts. These agreements between states must be approved by Congress if the compact alters the power relationship between the states and the national government. Defining constitutional powers, the early years. The Constitution makes considerable effort to list the specific enumerated powers of the federal government. However, to remain effective and relevant over the centuries, the framers understood that the Constitution had to be written in a somewhat broad manner, allowing the Supreme Court to provide a more specific interpretation of the general language. This was certainly the case with regard to the elastic clause, or the necessary and proper clause, and the provisions giving Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce. We have 2 Supreme Court cases that are essential to know throughout the school year. In the case of McCulloch v. Maryland, the Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8 embraces all means which are appropriate to carry out the legitimate ends of the Constitution, a ruling that dramatically expanded the power of Congress as well as the power of the federal government relative to the states. In this case, it dealt with, can the state of Maryland tax a federal bank? And as stated, no. This expanded the federal government's power. In the case of Gibbons v. Ogden, Chief Justice Marshall ruled that the power to regulate interstate commerce in Article 1, Section 8 was an exclusive national power and one that could be employed in a vigorous fashion to regulate areas that had been considered the domain of the states. The background of Gibbons v. Ogden: a New York state law gave to individuals the exclusive right to operate steamboats on water within state jurisdiction. Laws like this were duplicated elsewhere, which led to friction, as some states would require foreign or out-of-state boats to pay substantial fees for navigating privileges. In this case, Thomas Gibson, a steamboat owner who did business between New York and New Jersey under a federal coastal license, challenged the monopoly license granted to Aaron Ogden by New York. So again, these 2 cases both expanded the national government's power. Although the outcome of the Civil War established the supremacy of the national government, the debate over the division of authority has continued to this very day. In dual federalism, which ended in the 1930s, the state government and the national government are viewed as separate entities, like separate layers in a cake. Sometimes you'll hear this called layer cake federalism. The federal government and the state governments didn't do a whole lot together. The federal government took care of their responsibilities and didn't involve themselves with state matters. Then we have cooperative federalism. In cooperative federalism emerged in the 1930s, and this was when the national government wrestled with the Great Depression, involving the state government and national government cooperating in solving the problems, like merged portions of a marble cake. FDR was the big one. He pushed cooperative federalism with the New Deal. Some texts will have a third era of federalism called creative federalism, marked by money. In this textbook, we jump right to devolution, or new federalism. Under new federalism or devolution, the idea is to push back and give more responsibility to the states, because the federal government has enough of their own business, so they're trying to return power back to the states. Now I'd like to talk about the methods of implementing cooperative federalism. The first is categorical grants. These are for specific uses from the federal government. So the federal government will give a state or a city money for a specific use. Feeling the pressure. The strings attached to federal grants. Usually such grants must include matching funds from the state or local government. Often, grants have significant strings attached. We have block grants. Now, mayors, governors, city councils, they prefer the block grant. A block grant allows the state or local governments more leeway in deciding how to spend funds for a specific type of governmental service, such as health care. And then we have federal mandates. Sometimes the federal government will impose a mandate on a state or local government to implement a costly policy in return for funds that may not make up the full cost. So they may require a city to put up a light poles in certain over bridges, for example. Now they can give a portion of it, and they will call this a federal mandate if they give a portion of the money to pay for it. We also will see unfunded federal mandates. This is where the federal government will say, you're going to put up those light poles over the bridge to make sure that they're safe, but we're not going to give you any money to do it. So federal mandates sometimes include money or partial money. We also will have unfunded federal mandates where the federal government's going to tell you what to do. Tough luck, you're going to pay for it yourself. Since the early 1990s, the court has reined in some of the federal government's authority over the Commerce Clause, though this hardly amounts to a return back to the dual federalism era. One of the most significant decisions in this line of precedent is set in U.S. versus Lopez. In this case, the court struck down the Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990, arguing that the congressional power under the Commerce Clause was not unlimited and definitely had no appliance to the issue of guns in school. This was a matter for the states, not Congress. In 2000, the court ruled in U.S. versus Morrison that the federal government did not have the authority to implement aspects of the 1994 Violence Against Women's Act. With this act, Congress attempted to address gender-motivated crimes such as rape under its commerce authority. The Supreme Court has played a significant role in determining the line between the state and federal powers. Again, since 1990s, the Supreme Court has been somewhat reining in the national government's powers under the Commerce Clause and has given increased emphasis to the state powers under the 10th and 11th Amendments to the Constitution. New challenges to the balance of power between the federal and state governments come from prolonged economic recession that has limited the federal government's ability to transfer funds to the state to promote policy innovation, and from controversial social issues on which public opinion varies widely by state, including medical and recreational marijuana, and the immigration policy.